You and I struggled academically our entire lives. I have more of the ADHD and attentive piece, and you have the dyslexic piece, but like a severe dyslexia that we found out later in life. When did you start noticing that? How did that look? Take us back.
I've always had some challenges with reading. My comprehension was always there, but my speed was significantly slower than everyone else who I was working with. When it really started impacting my comprehension and catching up on me was in college, where I wasn't taking care of my basic needs. I wasn't getting the sleep I needed. That's when words started getting more jumbled. Topics were a little bit more in depth, and I had just more struggles with it overall.
What was middle school like? What do you remember being somewhat successful in middle school?
I knew how to play the game of school at a younger age. I knew how to talk to teachers, let them know like, hey, I'm falling behind, I'm struggling with my reading. That's kind of where I was able to level my playing field. But my struggles with reading, it definitely impacted me in areas I didn't realize at the time. Math is a great example. Word problems always destroyed me. Once I figured out it was the dyslexia, it changed my approach to the word problems, and it totally flipped that switch for me.
I remember everyone was like, oh yeah, Tyler got another C- on his math test. And like, we'd always talk about you and me in school, and the sentence would always end with, bless his heart. Tyler got a C- on a math test, bless his heart. He's doing as good as he can.
Yeah.
But it never dawned on us to like dig in and like look for those patterns.
I think there was part of me that was like, why am I failing these classes? But then there was another side of me where I could see some potential, right? Because I'd go to a class like social studies, where for whatever reason, I remembered the info, I crushed all the tests, but English, or like I said, math, things where you really had to pick apart the sentences and really understand those concepts in depth, that's when I really found that disconnect. And that's how we figured out there was a bigger underlying issue.
Middle school and high school, you were obviously a phenomenal athlete, all-state middle linebacker. You had this athletic side, and I think you probably did just enough to get through.
I think we see this with a lot of the athletes we work with. I knew how to apply myself to athletics. I knew what hard work looked like in that area. And then I knew how to just coast and get by in school. I didn't want to put in the work and fail. That was probably some of it, because once I did get the diagnosis with ADHD and dyslexia, and I was able to figure out how to overcome those challenges, I wanted to push myself in school, and I wanted to prove that I could be successful. And then when I did fail, I had a totally different mindset. I put in the effort, I tried, I just need to change my approach. That was a huge self-confidence booster. I'm not an idiot. There's just something else going on here. And now that I know what it is, I can level the playing field.
For whatever reason, and you and I work with a lot of athletes, we're willing to shoot 10,000 free throws and fail over and over and over. But we're not willing to do that in the classroom. And there's like this vulnerability exemplified.
You're exactly right. There's a lot more stigma around being stupid or something like that versus just not being good at basketball. It can be hard to put yourself out there and be willing to, talk in front of class and all those things, more so than it was to like take a chance in athletics.
Well, and also when you get really good at this thing, let's say that you become a really good softball player, and then you get to the classroom, it's hard to be vulnerable and be not as good. It's almost worse as you get older and get better at this one thing, but it's just something that we all have to find a way to overcome. You go out to college, and you had an interesting college journey, to say the least.
Yeah. At the university I went to, they had a board of all the top GPAs for all athletes. My freshman year, I wasn't on there, but I made the top 20 my first semester of my sophomore year. Second semester of sophomore year, I just started failing it. So it was like night and day difference. A lot of that was my struggles with time management. I didn't understand that with my dyslexia, things were going to take me longer. I would fall behind on, the huge amounts of reading that you have. I wasn't getting the sleep that I needed. And then, that impacted my dyslexia. And that's when I started seeing the major decline. So I was in the harder classes with more homework, and it was just kind of that snowball effect of it just got worse and worse. That's when I ended up failing multiple semesters, but I did get a diagnosis in there.
It's so rarely talked about it with dyslexia or another challenge. It gets worse as you sleep less. You start always at the bottom. Sleep, routine, exercise, structure, and then you kind of work your way up to accommodations, organizational structures. Always has to start with the foundation. So you struggle mightily. We're in year like 4 or 5 now. Did you get your degree from college?
Yes, it was a long route. Once I was done playing football, I ended up dropping out of school. I worked for a while, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what my path was. I actually don't even know what put me over the edge to get me back into school. I think it was something where I had put 3.5 years-ish in. It was just something that I needed to complete for myself, not even so much for like whatever career I wanted to get into. It was more like I needed to prove it to myself. So I finally re-enrolled into a community college. I realized I was lacking in structure as well. So my little way of structuring myself was I signed up for a class at 9 a.m. and I signed up for a class at 7 p.m. on the same day. And I stayed at that community college during my gap. On those days, I went to the gym there and I used that time. I had nothing else to do and I was bored out of my mind. So I was like, I might as well do homework. That's how I started getting moving in the right direction. I started seeing a lot more success because I knew that I needed more structure, and I kind of just forced it upon myself by setting up my classes like that. And then from there, I applied to a university and I ended up graduating. I put in another like year and a half. So in total with gaps, it was probably close to 7.5 years, I think. By the time I got back into a 4-year university, I ended up with pretty much all A's by the time I was done. It was a weird flip because I'd never had a schooling experience up until that point where I wasn't anxious about going and I didn't hate it. Once I kind of figured out what worked, it was like night and day where I didn't mind it. I didn't get anxious about it. I think it was a lot of that self-confidence that I built by figuring out what worked for me.
So played 4 years of college football. Like a lot of us don't even get the degree, right? We're there for whatever, right? We're there because we're there. Drop out, go back to a community college. From community college, work your way back to Colorado State University, and then graduate in about 7-ish years. For so many families, and including ours, it's like gut-wrenching to watch your child do this. My kid's gonna end up under a bridge. This struggle was your gift, and it's been fun to watch. The other piece, so you said, you kind of learned how to do school. Just from the outside, we saw you develop very clear structures and coping strategies like staying at the college. I think that's a great one. We also watched you learn how to learn. I don't think you knew how to learn before for you. How do you learn now? Let's say we have to figure out how to improve HR systems at Untapped. We give this random questions to you all the time. How do you figure that out?
When I figured it out in college, and this is kind of where I started seeing that success that I was talking about, I started bringing movement and activity into it. I would listen to everything. I started realizing that reading wasn't the most efficient use of my time. I didn't enjoy it. It took me significantly longer than most people, and I wasn't getting all of the information that I needed. I remember being in a summer course that was extremely condensed. I think it was like a 4-week course or something like that, and it was hours and hours of reading. I would walk my dog for 2 hours a day. I would stop and take notes on my phone, and then I'd just keep walking, and I would timestamp them and everything like that. So then when I got back to my desk, I could go back, take a little bit more in-depth notes, and I would re-listen to it, take quotes from that, and do those kind of things. That's kind of where I think I started enjoying learning and wanting to continue doing it, whether it was for school or just my own personal interest or for business.
I remember from the outside, we saw you probably like 25 years old. We saw someone who didn't really love to learn.
Yeah.
You almost had been deprived of learning going through the traditional education system, and then you just couldn't get enough of it. And then we saw the systems that you started developing, like timestamping and stopping. And this was a huge mental thing for me. It's like there's no right or wrong way to acquire information. You walking and reading is the most efficient use of your time versus someone else that's terribly inefficient use of your time. Yeah. The goal is just to figure out how you learn. I think it's such an important point for a lot of our families to hear.
The way school's set up, it doesn't pique a lot of students' interest, whether it's the content that they're learning or the way it's being put out there, whether they have diagnosis, neurodiverse, or for whatever reason might just struggle in school. If it's something that's hard for you, it's kind of human nature to get anxious about it and not enjoy it. So I think there's something about teaching students how can they find a way to learn in a way that is enjoyable to them, because everybody's got something they want to learn about. And once you figure out their learning style through their interest, then I think you can address that back to school. When I started listening to books on tape, it wasn't school related. It was things that I was interested in. That's when I started realizing, I do actually like learning. I can apply this to school, even if it's a topic I'm not interested in. I can take these same approaches and apply it there and at least try to enjoy it and learn it better than I would by trying to do it the traditional way.
Tell your bloody nose story, because our mom would get all these calls when Tyler was in like middle school. They'd be like, Tyler has a bloody nose.
In Spanish class, I was so unbelievably far behind. I didn't even know how to ask a question because I was like, I don't even know where to start. So every day when they would go around the room to start calling on people randomly, I would give myself a bloody nose and I would have to run out to the nurse's office.
Because you didn't want to get called on in Spanish or have to read or have to whatever, you just give yourself a bloody nose.
I was able to do it on point, and then the teacher started calling me out on it. A buddy of mine told the teacher that I was developing a throat issue and I couldn't talk or I could risk losing my voice forever. And then that backfired at parent-teacher conference night. And then I actually had to start talking in class and I couldn't get out of it anymore. And I've seen that with students I work with here is when you're anxious and uncomfortable, parents see it as like not wanting to learn. When you're so anxious, you start to shut down. You're not even capable of learning at that point, right? It's that fight or flight mode. And I think I was so far into that where I was like trying to do everything possible to just escape it. and I didn't even know how to even talk to my parents or people I trust. I was just so overwhelmed by all of it.
Foreign language and dyslexia, such a struggle. The amount of literal bloodshed to get you out of that class was, it's funny looking back at it, but it's probably not that funny at the time. Whenever we have a hard problem here, we ask you to solve it first. With dyslexia, your brain works different and you see problems different in this beautiful way. So you come up with stuff that time and time again have just been home runs for us. You figured out how to systematize your life in a way that automates the stuff that's a challenge, but allows you to access your gift. How do you read your email? Because you get tons of emails from very high level parents.
I always listen to everything that comes in. I have a few different tools that I use for that. Once I type out the response, I listen to my response back because often my spelling is so far off. Even spell check can't correct it the right way. Sometimes too, I'll even write out what my bullets are before I start writing it, and then I'll organize my bullet points, and then I'll start writing that email out. And then I'll copy what I've written in there just to make sure that it sounds appropriate and it makes sense.
Thanks for sharing all this. I love the no excuse mindset. There's a system to solve this. Thanks again, my friend.
Thank you.